G'day Cobbers. Today we'll be going over a very key part of the Australian Army impression of World War II, and it's going to be something that a lot of people have, but they get it wrong. So they've got all the gear, but they have no idea type stuff. And that, of course, is the Slouch hat. Now, in this video, I'm going to be covering both world wars to the extent of my knowledge. I'm more particularly knowledgeable on World War II. So if you want more information about World War One, look at original sources. That's the best advice I can give you. From my understanding, it's pretty much the same as World War II, but there may be a few differences, particularly with the light horse and all that sort of stuff, which I'm not too knowledgeable on. But this is pretty much the second AIF. So World War II in North Africa, Middle East, at home, in the Pacific, all that sort of stuff. This is how they traditionally worn their hats. I've got these from original photos, which I will include in this video. I've also got them from reenactors when I first started out, because I very much fell for these tropes of propaganda almost of how the Australians wore their slouch hat. But yeah, this is designed essentially just to make sure you're wearing your slouch hat properly, because it is a symbol of Australia, and although there is the common trope of people wearing it gallantly fighting the enemy, that's not necessarily exactly what happened, and I'm going to be going over that and all of the common reenactor tropes I see, especially from those who aren't in Australia, so reenactors overseas. They commonly get this aspect wrong, again falling for the whole trope of gallantly worn in combat, where some of the best reenactors who wear them properly are people who've done a lot of research through the Australian War Memorial, or veterans of the Australian Defence Force who've actually worn these as their job, and they've modified it to how they would have worn it, and that's pretty much what the Anzacs did. So in this segment, we'll be going over the main features of the slouch hat itself, that being the bash, the puggery, the badge, and the chin strap, because these are the common bits that reenactors get wrong, particularly, again, those overseas. Have seen in Australia, again, I fell for these tropes at some stage, and this is me learning from other reenactors and other sources, as I've said. I'm not the best reenactor. I've got a lot to improve on, particularly my kit from both ends of the war, the early war and late war. So this is just me sharing what I know, particularly about the slouch hat. If you guys notice anything I say wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments below. I'm all for learning. You learn something new every day. But we'll get started with it. So essentially, I'm going to stick to mainly the Second World War, sorry. I may reference the First World War because, again, not entirely sure on that one. But essentially, Second World War, we'll start with the puggery. So there are many different variations of the puggery during the Second World War. Particularly in the 1930s, we started to see the more modern type of puggery, for example. Again, modern example, where it has the folds in the puggery. However, what we can sort of see is that Australian soldiers did revert back to the plain puggery as the one I'm wearing now. Please excuse the hair, but essentially, this is the plain puggery. This is a Lawrence Ordnance reproduction. There are many different places that do reproductions. These are a World War One style, and again, different places, different levels of accuracy. You do see the thick ones like this, and then you do see the thinner ones. Thinner ones, more or less, I've seen are from World War One. And I believe Warwick's in Victoria, they're the best ones for those thin sort of puggeries. But the thicker ones, which you sort of see in World War II, they're more common in World War II. I recommend Lawrence Ordnance. They're very good in that regard. And essentially, it gets the look done perfectly. So units that would wear the plain puggery. So essentially, it would be any group that wasn't part of the AIF, so the Australian Imperial Force. It would be the Citizens Military Force. So garrison battalions, auxiliary, all that sort of stuff. Anything part of the CMF and not the AIF, they would have the plain puggery. There may be a few exceptions into that, but I'm not particularly knowledgeable on each unit's sort of puggery. This is, again, general look. You do see a mix of the folded puggeries and the plain puggeries. For example, again, I refer back to my original slouch hat badge. Sorry, slouch hat. The puggery is very different. This one's the one that's kind of synonymous with the Second World War, is the folded puggery. Now, one key thing with the folded puggery that you need to make sure you're aware of is that each fold only has 5 folds. The modern ones have 7. Now, I do have an example from World War II. Well, this one has 6. This one's on a Slouch hat that I believe is from World War II. Varying sources. One of my mates said it's actually post-war. I'd believe him. He's a very reliable source. So I'm not going to differentiate from him. I'm not going to claim it's entirely World War II because they go for a lot of money. There's no date on the inside or anything. But essentially, this one is dated 1944. I'll just show you that one there. So a very late war one. I'm not sure if it'll focus, but 1944 just there. And essentially, this is a 6-folded puggery, at least from my count. So you do see them, but again, very late war, so I wouldn't recommend using them. But let's focus on early war real quick. So early war, mainly plain puggeries. The RAF actually preferred using the plain puggery, sort of set up for this type of thing. It was more favoured among the troops, and you do see a lot of photos at El Alamein, Tobruk, Middle East. I believe you can see them in Greece and Crete, but don't quote me on that one. But essentially, they used these ones because they were preferred among the troops. You do see them, however, use the 5 puggery, so the folded puggery. So you can use both. It's not entirely inaccurate for you to have one, but just make sure it's got the 5 folds and it's worn properly. So the divot is down the centre. The local museum I volunteer at had a modern one, but the divot was on the side, so I had to correct that one for them. So another really common thing I see from reenactors, particularly again overseas, not necessarily in Australia, but it has happened, I've fallen for the trope, is they have the wrong type of Rising Sun badge. They'll have the Australian Army one with the Queen's Crown, which is inaccurate. That one came in the 90s. Then there were various ones between the Second World War to the 90s. However, the ones that they wore during World War I and World War II were the 4th pattern Rising Sun badge. So those are the ones with the King's Crown, and it says Australian Commonwealth Military Forces. Those are essentially the badge you ought to wear. Now, for example, the ones you should be wearing are black, like the one I'm wearing just on here. Fantastic reproduction by Lawrence Ordnance. So essentially, this is one of them, and this is the other. A lot of people have this brass-plated type one, which is the original colour. However, they'll actually oxidize to have a black sort of appearance. So, realistically, you should be wearing the black ones. Again, in some photos, you do see them where they do seem like a more bronze colour. But from, again, my knowledge, go for the majority, and the majority wore the black oxidized badge. So try and aim for that one. And again, when wearing it, really only it was worn when it was turned up, which we'll get onto in a second because another reenactorism. However, when it was down, in the early parts of the war, you can still see them attached to the badge, but we'll get onto, attached to the hat. We'll get onto that in a minute. But essentially, yeah, you should be aiming for these ones. Lawrence Ordnance makes a brilliant reproduction, which I'll actually link down in the description. Some reproductions have the back bit full, where this is more like a shell type thing, where you can see the outside. Lawrence Ordnance reproductions will actually have it like the originals on the back. Alright, so we're now going to go and get into how the hat's worn, and I'm going to break this up into certain time periods. So, when you're on parade, we'll start early war, go later war, but when you're on parade, your hat should be worn like this, like I'm currently wearing it. So you should have 4 fingers on the side, 3 there, 2 there, and 1 there, sorry. But again, this does vary, because there was sort of like a standardized way. However, in World War II, that wasn't really a thing. In modern day, there is a standardized way of wearing a slouch hat. But in World War II, you can see them like this, for example. You can see them on all sorts of angles, but you rarely ever see them actually flat like this one is now. They're often on the angle. I prefer mine like this, which is completely fine because you see photos of people wearing them like this, but you also do see them on more drastic angles. It's really up to personal discretion. There's a photo of my great-grandfather wearing it, and his is on quite the angle, which is a perfect example of how they were worn. So that's a really major thing people need to look out for. Make sure it's not flat, because a common thing I see, they're always flat. World War I might be a bit different, but World War II, they were always on an angle as far as I know. The only time they were really flat was when they were worn in the field. So they also come with a really modern bash, like this one. So this goes into how it should be worn. It comes with a really modern bash. So it's got a high bash, for example. In World War II, see how mine's a bit different. It sort of puffs out at the back and folds in. This one still has a rather modern appearance, but they're often pushed down or modified because, again, in World War II, there wasn't a standardized way of putting a bash in a hat. That was up for the soldier's personal discretion. And that's what you often see. You'll see a wide range of bashes in hats. This one, I've gotten some photos of different bashes from the Middle East, particularly Tobruk, or North Africa, Middle East, and Tobruk. And I've modeled of some of the ones there. So one of the ones I noticed that has a big puff at the back, which was a common I could see. Then the bash sort of blends into a nice point, and it actually folds at the front. So when worn in the field, it was worn something like this. This hat isn't broken in enough for my liking. I'm trying to do that. It is a new hat. But essentially, sides were down. It's not the gallant thing you see in TV shows and movies and pictures of Gallipoli where the side's always up and they always fight like that. In places like Gallipoli in World War One, and in places in World War II, Middle East, North Africa, Tobruk, it was a hot place. So they're going to do the common sense thing and they're going to turn their hats down. You do see some occasional photos of them turning up if it's like an important visit, a parade, or the odd soldier who's just had it up. But most of the time you do see it down, and you do see the badge worn like this down the side. But you do also see soldiers actually take it off and it's just a bare hat. They do keep this, mind you, but they just take it off. Another major thing when it's worn, particularly in the early stage of the war, so again Tobruk, so 1940-41, the chin strap was always worn. And another thing on the chin strap is it's a very thick chin strap in design. Whereas with the modern ones, they are very thin. That's a big inaccuracy. Most ones I see are thick. Now you do see the occasional thin ones, but from the photos that I've seen on the War Memorial and family photos, they were traditionally thick chin strap badges. So essentially, yeah, with the chin strap. But when it's worn like this, it's often worn with a bit of a dip down the front. Not too great, but not too little. It's like right in the middle. Sides down. Sometimes they're bent down like this. Like, I'll show you some photos of some ones. Like, these things were bashed beyond buggery. They were essentially used. So, for example, realistically, by the end of the war, they did start looking like this, where it's all bent out of shape and it sorts of starts to look very deformed. Now, one thing you'll notice with this one, no chin strap on it, that one actually broke. And towards the later end of the war, you do see a mix of people wearing their chin straps and not wearing it. Again, really up to personal discretion. But again, do your own research, find it with the majority. Majority rules do say it was probably worn. Now, I'll put this one on for you. As you can see, this one is quite small for me, hence why I got a new one. It doesn't fit me anymore. But you do see, though, some photos of slouch hats where they are a bit small, especially in the bush, and they're like bent down like this. There's one from Tobruk that I'll try and find for you, where it's all bent down the sides. But yeah, try and get one that has a decent brim, not too thick, but it fits nicely around the head and has a decent brim. Because World War II slouch hats, as far as I know and I've seen from photos, they had really wide brims, but don't look like Cody Smith McPhee from Gallipoli, where the hat is way too oversized. Make sure the hat fits around your head most importantly, and if it has a decent brim, that's good. We're now going to look at the later stages of the war, how these were worn, particularly in the Pacific, where sometimes they were unrecognisable. So like this one, as you can see, the puggery's been taken off, and the badge has been taken off. And that's the thing you do see towards the later end of the war. The badges were taken off, the puggeries were taken off, just to have this more natural look. And that's essentially what happened. I don't know how else to explain it. I'm not entirely sure on a reason why. Someone might have a more lightened form of knowledge on that and comment on it below. This is what I've seen from pictures. So essentially, this was taken off, and a really good sign of that it's actually worn and more authentic is that wear it with the puggery off, and then take the puggery off for the Pacific, if you do a Pacific impression. And it will start to have like this nice different contrast that does show it's an old hat and adds more flavour to your impression. That leads me on to my next point. The best form of weathering for a slouch hat is to wear it. I don't like to artificially weather it, even though it's a reproduction, I probably could. But the best form of usage, in my opinion, is actually wearing it. So, not that it's very visible on this one, but if you start to get sweat marks on the inside of your hat, around your hat, that's really good. On my officer's cap, you can see that there have been sweat stains on there, which just shows that it has been used. Do that with these ones. Hope this video has helped, guys. Stay tuned. I am working on the pocketbook series, but this thing just sort of came up and I thought I'd work on it from there. Anyway, thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.